Good evening. Welcome to this webinar, When in Our Music, Music and Musicians in the Time of Pandemic. My name is Christopher Wells. I'm the Director of Music and Organist at Christ Church Cranbrook, and I am one of the co-hosts of tonight's program. Tonight we will explore this time of pandemic, anxiety and isolation, when churches are shuttered and musicians are distanced from choirs and collaborators. How are musicians responding, personally, collectively, and musically? How does music speak to us in a time of crisis as we prepare for a Holy Week and Easter like no other? As we start into tonight's program, I'd like to point our viewers to some of the features that we have with this technology and just make a note about the Zoom webinar feature of Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you should see an icon that says Q&A. If you click there, you are welcome to submit a question, and we will start to answer those questions as the program goes on. And before we really get started, I'm going to offer a prayer from the Episcopal Church's Book of Common Prayer. Let us pray. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth. And grant to them even now, glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Joining us this evening, we have David Sinden, who is a podcast host of All Things Right and Musical. He's the director of music at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in St. Louis, Missouri. You know, I was first introduced to David around 2004 by way of his former website titled The Sin Den, where he was waxing poetically about the appropriate flavor of Altoids for the different church seasons, you know, suggesting that cinnamon could be used for the season of Advent, and maybe that the white Altoids would be used for the season of Christmas, and so on. Since then, I've read further into your website and blog, and I'm continually inspired by your knowledge and research and passion for church music. So thanks for being with us tonight, David. You are curiously strong.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here with you. I'm glad that you put this on.
Maxine Thévenot is here with us tonight. She is the canon presenter at the Cathedral of St. John in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she's also a lecturer in organ at the University of New Mexico. She's the founder and director of Polyphony, the Voices of New Mexico. The choir here knows you well, if only by the several compositions of yours that we've performed. So it's nice to finally put a face to those scores, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And Ruben Valenzuela is the director of music at All Souls Point Loma, California. And he's also the founder and director of Bach Collegium San Diego, and also the director of La Jolla Symphony Chorus. Finally, I'd like to introduce my colleague Nathan Costa, who is co-hosting tonight's webinar. Nathan is the assistant director of music and liturgist at Christ Church Cranbrook. And before I turn the mic over to him, I'm also going to just give a shout out to our technology side. Meredith Skoronsky is working on our behalf behind the scenes, so thank you so much, Meredith. I'll turn the mic over to Nathan.
Thanks, Christopher. We've gathered these folks here tonight from across, I think, 3 different time zones, including our own, for what we hope will be a real dialogue and conversation among each other, and to the extent possible among all of us. We have, as a panel, have compiled some questions and have solicited some from other colleagues as well. I think all of us around the country and the world at this time are trying to basically make sense of this moment and what it means for ourselves, our families, our communities, schools, places of worship, our livelihoods, and our vocations and ministries. And I thought maybe we could begin with just maybe a quick word from each of us about the conditions and the situation we're all living and working under, since it seems to be slightly different, at least in different parts of the country. Here in Michigan, we're under pretty strict instructions from the Episcopal Diocesan Bishop and the Governor. Today, all schools were closed for the remainder of the year. As of last week, only clergy and their families who live on a church campus are allowed into a church building. Maybe starting with Ruben, given that the West Coast has sort of been on the front wave of this pandemic and has moved pretty quickly into different directives, what has this time meant for you and for your work?
Well, thank you, Nathan. Yeah, we started, I think March 8th was the last Sunday where we had normal church, quote unquote. And then as things started to evolve, as you all remember, at least in my neck of the woods, it was literally evolving hour to hour for a few days. And it became clear very early in that following week that we would not be meeting for rehearsal on Thursday that followed. And then it went from there. We had a choir retreat planned with another parish that weekend. That got called off. Evensong got called off. So, and then it went from 50 to, I think, 10. And I don't think we ever even got to 10. By that point, the bishop was very, very direct and said, just better to just close the doors and do church in alternative ways. And for us, that meant Zoom, which I think is the case for many people at this point.
Maxine, nearby, what's your experience been like?
Our experience has been maybe a week behind Ruben's. So I was ominously March 13th, which I think this year was a Friday, and it was that really wacky week where we had the full moon. We had, just everything seemed to be happening that particular week in the world. And so March 13th, I believe, is when we had the big change from worshiping as a full congregation to that Sunday, the 15th, going down to no more than 50, which for us meant basically a social distanced choir and clergy. And that was it. Then Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember now because, time has been very strange in the last 2 weeks. But I think it was the 16th or the 17th, then the new regulations came down from the governor and through the diocesan office of no more than 10. So it was clear that no more choir rehearsals were going to happen. And then I think it was later that same week, or perhaps even the following week, Monday, where that then changed to 5. And that's still currently where we're at of no gatherings larger than 5 people.
Wow. David, your last podcast, I think I saw, was on the day the diocesan churches were closed for public worship. Is that right?
I think that is right. Our story tracks really similarly to Maxine's. I think that we were in church on the 15th, but it felt really different. The choir all dutifully showed up to a person. They were all there. But just looking out in the pews, it was clear that something had changed. People were largely staying away that day, so things felt very different. And in Missouri, we're still not under a statewide stay-home order, but St. Louis and St. Louis County, which is where our parish is located, both have separate shelter-in-place kind of orders. The county's initially was more restrictive, and that was at 10 people. And I think technically that's still the order that we're under, is no more gatherings larger than 10 people. So our service the following week on Laetare Sunday, March 22nd, involved a quartet of singers and myself. So we were half of the 10. And then the following week, the clergy opened the conversation about doing the same thing again. and circumstances had changed enough that I just said, I'm not comfortable asking the choir to come again this week. And I think by the end of the week, they would have made that decision for themselves. So I think that's part of what we're all experiencing here, that the ground is very much shifting underneath our feet. So week to week feels like a new hurdle. Day to day largely feels like a new kind of hurdle in a lot of these instances. So yeah.
Yeah, one of my colleagues said that it's hard to plan beyond the next day. You know, we take things in 48-hour chunks, which is hard when you think about we have our biggest week of the year coming up with Holy Week and Easter week, and I guess that brings me to the next question: like, what is the role of music? How can we make music during these weeks? And I think of musicians and liturgists. We tend to be maximalists, right? We don't want 3 drops of water. We want a full immersion. We don't want just a choir. We want brass and organ if you can afford it or whatever. But now we're maybe asked to be minimalists in stranger ways, or to be creative. Maybe Maxine, since you're the one of us that has that has maybe at least continuing worship, with, you said 4 maybe, or a handful.
Well,
or
the five include our bishop and our dean, and myself. And so that leaves room, depending on whether the bishop is there or not. Sometimes he's not there. That leaves room for 2 or 3 others. And because my assistant organist happens to also be my husband, we decided that because we're sort of quarantined, self-isolated, I guess, that we would be 2 of the 3 a lot of times, just to kind of minimalize that interaction with new people, I guess. So for us right now, it's really just repertoire, for potentially 1 singer, and myself, and the clergy, and possibly 2. So that's kind of the repertoire realm that I'm delving into at the moment, which has been challenging and exciting all at once.
Do the others of you have thoughts about, whether it's particular music, or what is your role as a musician? What is your role as a leader of musicians in your parishes right now?
Well, in the first couple of weeks, so I'm in sort of week 3 of this reality, is that because, I do have that musicology background. A lot of times in rehearsals, I feel like 2 hours, my rehearsal's 2 hours, isn't enough sometimes to unpack some incredible musicological ideas and context and this and that. And so the first 2 weeks, I actually found it very somewhat exciting that I was sending regular material to my choirs about the music we were to have sung, about, well, check this out. We've sung this motet now 2 or 3 years during Holy Week. Let me give you some information about it that you may not know. And that was very, very, very fun to do. Now in the 3rd week, to be honest with you, I'm running out of ways to stay connected with them, which is starting to get, it's just more difficult at this point. And those folks that know me very well know that I have zero techie in my background. I am like zero tech, but I actually found myself this morning playing with that a cappella app that David Sinden I saw posted earlier, because some of my section leaders are pushing me to, like, we need to help in some way. We feel helpless on the sidelines, not being able to do worship the way we normally do. So here we are.
Yeah, I think I echo that sense of helplessness and just impotency on the sidelines. Music requires so much, being in the same room, breathing the same air, seeing the same thing, seeing the same conductor, feeling the same presences. So yeah, I think we were all looking for those creative ways to create. I mean, one of the things that we have at St. Peter's, which I think puts us to somewhat of an advantage, is we do have archived recordings of all the services from the last four years or so. So to some extent, I've thought about going in and clipping those, and our worship videos right now, they take the form of pre-recorded videos that we push out at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. We're able to drop some recorded sound into that, but I think that's going to get very tired very quickly because it just feels so derivative and authentic. And I think that's not really where musicians want to be. I think we want to contribute something, and so I think we're still trying to work out what that something is. So this week, for the first time, we're going to try a virtual recording, layering together different audio files that I've asked the choir to send if they're able, just of a 4-part hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.
Sure.
But I think that really just hearing something that's been created during this time will be far more meaningful this week than hearing just sort of the way things used to be, which is the best that our recordings can provide.
Sure. Maxine.
Like you, Ruben, I think when March 17th hit for me and we were supposed to have choir that night, I thought, my gosh, what can I do? This is going to be really hard on everyone. And I started a sort of daily dose newsletter and did that for about 10 days. And during that 10 days, then thought of like, what can we do after that? Because this is only going to get worse and not better quickly. And so in that daily dose, it was a little bit of a historical continuum, I guess, of Anglican choral repertoire. Some of our favorites, and like you in rehearsals, you're always pressed for time musically, and so you never have chance to talk about the composers or the piece as much as you might like. So I use that as a sort of an educational opportunity. And then just this past week, we rolled out our daily musical offering because during that time when we could have 10 people, we did manage to put a few little tracks down and made some YouTube videos. And so we've got enough rep, I guess, now for the next 3.5 weeks or so. But after that, we're going to be dialing into our recordings that have been made over the last decade. And it might be kind of fun. I don't know. I'm hoping it won't get old. I'm hoping that people will love hearing themselves from 10 years ago versus now, and how the choir has potentially changed and how we've all grown and musically and, otherwise.
Yeah, we've struggled a little bit with that question between recording and live stream. Live stream seems to be the means or the medium of choice these days. And we've also done a lot of some explorations into the virtual choir. Christopher, do you want to say a few words about our work with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is probably a topic that we could have an entire webinar on, and the reactions to virtual choirs are as varied as the people who are contributing and listening to them. It seems to me to start a couple with saying a couple things, that anything virtual will never compare with the real deal. And that's a tough place to start when you're starting getting people involved in a virtual choir. The immediate payoff that we have as musicians when we're making music next to each other it's so gratifying that you just start to love what you're doing, and that's not necessarily the case when you're recording for a virtual choir, because you're not hearing what your fellow musicians are doing. You have to wait, sometimes weeks to hear what those results are going to sound like, versus hearing what those results sound like, I guess, instantaneously. So I think there's a lot of challenges that go into that. It's hugely time consuming, hugely time consuming. So what we might hear in was, I can't remember whether it was Ruben or David were saying about recording just a simple hymn. What we could probably accomplish in person in 5 minutes might very well take 40 hours on the backside of things. And those aren't necessarily fun numbers to think about. But then we also think about, are we doing this for ourselves, or are we doing this for other people? And normally music is both and, where we're able to enjoy both of those simultaneously. I'll tell you, it's been a steep learning curve for me, and I'd welcome any of your advice on this. I think Maxine has her hand up.
Chris, I think it was you who posted a virtual choir thing that you put together with a hymn, just a hymn. Is that right?
Right.
And I was so inspired by that, I have to tell you, that it inspired me to put together a sort of like event, whereby the backing track right now is just, piano, and we're just going to put together Jesus Christ is Risen Today. And we put it out this morning, actually, as a sponsored event by the Cathedral of St. John to the entire diocese of the Rio Grande. And so we're inviting people to listen to the click track, sing along, at a certain tempo, and then submit their voice and submit a photo of themselves as well, so that we can come up with some sort of tangible photo collage, and they can, find themselves in the photo collage. And I know this is going to take an incredible amount of work, and I'm so incredibly grateful to my very tech-savvy husband, who's going to help me put all that together. But I think with a deadline of Good Friday, that has some poignancy about it. And the fact that then post-Easter, when we plan to roll this out to the diocese and to the people who participated and people who didn't participate, but who will be active listeners, I think that's something for them to look forward to beyond Easter. Because right now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm more worried about 50 days after Easter and what's going to transpire than I am in the next 10 days, for example.
Right. We're talking a lot about some frustrations that we're having as musicians, and I think it might be worth talking a little bit about musicians and hardship right now, because like every other profession in the world, and I'm guessing every other person in the world, there are hardships in the times we're living in right now. Perhaps some people are less affected and some people are more affected but there are a lot of musicians right now that are just totally out of work. And many musicians are contract employees that really depend on the next gig to pay their mortgage bill. So I'd like to know how you all are faring in that.
Well, I have to say that at the moment, I feel rather blessed, actually, that between my church position and I'm also employed by La Jolla Symphony Chorus and Bach Collegium in San Diego, that they remain committed to continuing the work that we've set out to do, albeit in a very different way. We would have been, in some of these cases, we would have been planning for concerts that are now canceled, that have really turned into opportunities to communicate to audience members, or in the church sense, parishioners, in a very different way. The pastoral side of what I do has grown exponentially by just the nature of the nature. I've never considered myself gifted in the pastoral sense, but this has forced that out of me, and it's been very good for me to regularly call on choir members, make sure, are you guys okay? Do you need anything? And even beyond the choir, just parishioners who I know live alone and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there is a lot of, at least on my end, a lot of good that has come out of it. But fortunately, at the moment, I'm not in a position where, financially, I'm, oh God, what's going to happen? But I know a lot that are.
And how about the musicians that you work with in Bachlegium?
Well, that that has been difficult, because one of the things that happened early on as this started to evolve was I was with the La Jolla Symphony Chorus. We had a Britain War Requiem planned for early March, and we were one of the first organizations here in San Diego to cancel something. And I'll be honest with you, around March 7th, I actually walked away from the meeting where that decision was made feeling like, I think you canceled this prematurely. I mean, we would have been performing this in 4 days. And looking back now, there's no question that we made the right decision. When you hear these stories about choir members being infected in other states, and then a week later, I was faced with the decision with the board about canceling the St. Matthew Passion with Bach Collegium San Diego, and that involves over 50 people, some of which, this is work that they depend on. These are foremost musicians in this country who perform with many groups, and it left me in a dilemma. Like, we need to make the right decision, and so these were very hard questions that the board had to wrestle with. And fortunately, I feel, thank God, the board that I work with felt very strongly that these folks need to be paid something for what they're losing, and point them in the direction to get more wherever they can. So we're doing everything we can. Church is a little trickier, of course, because I'm sure I'd be curious to know how you're dealing with the whole element of staff singers and that sort of thing. So that's another can of worms, I think.
David.
Yeah, initially we hoped that this would just be a couple weeks. So I told the staff singers, don't worry about it. Your pay will sort of continue as normal. And then just recently, the vestry sort of had a formal meeting about this and decided that we can continue to fulfill our financial obligations to our staff singers throughout the season. So I'm very glad for that. I'm very glad for that decision. I think it will change, assuming we're back at some point in the summer. I think it will change kind of our normal summer operations. We're used to bringing on an octet of staff singers, an octet of singers at least, and mixed between paid and non-paid. So I think those numbers will almost certainly need to change for the summer months. And then we'll sort of take a look at where we are for the fall. Hopefully we'll be back on regular footing by then. But of course, something that all churches are dealing with right now is just simply having the plate passed in front of you reminds you to put some money in there. So giving has really dried up at the moment, and I think that's giving churches kind of a shock. And as part of this, we're seeing a huge economic crisis in this country. So that's also going to have long-term implications for all of our churches to some degree. So I think that all sort of remains an open question going forward. But I'm committed to doing what I can to make sure that things continue as normal for singers who have committed to being with us.
Maxine, what's going on at the cathedral?
Well, at the cathedral, the singers that are coming in, those are all staff singers. They want to be there. They're not obligated by any stretch of the imagination, but they really want to be there. And whether they're there or not, they're going to be paid through to the end of the season, which is the end of May, beginning of June is typically our end of season. We were to be going on a choir tour this summer to Canada, and I haven't made any formal announcements about this, but as time goes on, that's looking less and less likely to go through, of course, since we're considered non-essential travel, and obviously for the reasons of COVID-19. So beyond August, I really don't know. I don't know what the church will be able to support. I just don't know. But like all of you, I think we're all feeling a little pinch, or maybe more than a pinch. So I guess time will tell. But I think reaching out and doing the live streams and just reaching out, phone calls, implementing that good old phone tree system, and that kind of reaching out, I think is really what's going to maintain that connection with our congregants and our choirs. And I think, at least my experience over the last couple of weeks in that sort of reaching out by phone, people have said, hey, is somebody picking up the mail? Because I still want to mail my check. I still want to mail in my pledge, and that's heartwarming.
Maxine, you were talking about non-essential travel, and that might be sort of an extra activity that your people love to do, and our people love to do that as well. But it does make me go to this question of essential and non-essential. Is music essential, and is church essential? And I think that's a pretty steep question, and it might be rather broad. But I'm curious what you all have to say about it.
So I'll jump in there and say that I think yes, both are essential. Are both essential in this time. I think church is certainly essential in this time, and we're seeing that church looks very differently. But music, as we understand it, music making has fundamentally changed and is changing in all of these places. So I was heartened, Chris, when you read the prayer for church musicians and artists at the beginning of this meeting, and the phrase there, "who seek." That prayer is not actually about making music per se. It doesn't ask God that we make good music. It asks, what are the words? Those who seek. Be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music. So I think we should take some comfort that even in our seeking, we are blessed by God. And so whatever we're able to sort of make out of this, I think we'll sort of have to be good enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Maxine said something about, being more concerned with, what the 50 days of Easter look like and the stretches beyond that, even more than the immediacy of Holy Week that we usually feel upon us now, and I think, we, in speaking ahead of time, we also talked about how this week maybe feels different in our country, among our choirs, now that we're 2-3 weeks in, and I wonder what does that essential seeking look like, 4 or 5 weeks from now? How do we begin to sort of think about that work?
Yeah, I wonder, and related to that, I think Easter is always a big deal. I think in most of our parishes, I think places that can afford it like to hire brass for that day. Brass players will not be showing up anywhere this year, but it's difficult to find silver linings in this at this point. But I wonder if one of the things that we might be able to think about going forward is, since Easter Day is necessarily lessened in some way, if that could help us to reclaim the totality of the Easter season a little bit more this year. If whatever we're able to put forward on Easter, if that sort of continues in some sort of similar way throughout the 50 days, if we might be able to make the point to people, all of this is the season of Easter. And so just because you couldn't, wear your fancy clothes and hear the good brass and timpani on Easter Day, there's nothing lessened really in this Easter season. It's all of a piece.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Ruben and Maxine on this, but before they respond to it, I want to remind the audience that now's a great time to put in any questions that you'd like answered because we're going to head into the Q&A in just a little bit. So Ruben and Maxine, is music essential? Is church essential?
Well, I was going to say, to follow up what David was saying, at its most basic, music is communication, is it not? It is flat out communication, and I think that's some of what we're all mourning, is this sense that we're not together and we can't communicate in the ways in which we have been doing, whether it be with our choir members or congregations and that sort of thing. That there's a definite sense of loss that we're all feeling, no question there. But in a weird sort of way, the opportune timing of this is not lost somehow, in that Holy Week is next week. And when I'm getting drafts from my rector as to, okay, what can we do? What can we pull off? I think we're forced to think, what is at its most basic, the very core of which each of these days in the week, what does it boil down to? Whether we're talking about Good Friday or if we're trying to do some form of Tenebrae or whatever the case may be, I think it's just an interesting timing that next week is Holy Week. And Maxine alluded to the 50 days after, and if I get through Easter Day, I'm going to consider it a triumph and then pick up and go from there, because I think it's going to be quite some time before things are back to normal. I think we all can sense that at this point. And I guess if there is some silver lining, most of our seasons are probably winding down at the end of May or early June, that there is a little bit at the light at the end of the tunnel there for that very question of how far can we support our staffs and our section leaders and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Music is core. I mean, for so many people, and I know that I'm speaking beyond the realm of us as musicians, but for the people of my congregation, I can certainly say that for them, that's the way their souls connect to the greater God. And whether in this adaptation of church that we're all doing, we're all adapting, we're all changing right now, like we're making church different. We're still reaching out, and I think that although the church long term may not be able to survive in this state of isolation, I don't know, I think that we all know that this will end, and we can look to that as some sort of level of comfort. And I think that so long as we continue to adapt and do so with integrity and tremendous care and continue to connect, I think that we will thrive and we will survive this, and that music will then be made even stronger and be made with even more joy and perhaps even a greater sense of understanding and depth into what word and liturgy of the word really means.
Ruben, you mentioned Holy Week and trying to figure out what the place is of music, or how can we get to the core of what these days are. I wonder, for all of you, what have you found certain some ways, what has been your creative thinking about Holy Week or in the coming days? We had a question from Jennifer Pasquale at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, who asked, what have you found, or have you found some ways to help your community remotely worship and prepare and pray these holiest days of the year? Are there things that seem to be working in live stream or whatever form that we're using for worship?
Well, at least on my end, I mean, I think we're all in because of the timing of things shutting down. I think we were all forced to do things somewhat differently, you know. But in my case, we sort of immediately went to Zoom, doing things and pre-recording them on Zoom, so that allowed us a little bit of editing if need be. And at least in my congregation, the thing that I keep hearing is that we're just glad to see familiar faces, reading the lessons, reading scripture. I had some of my section leaders, you know, singing the psalm, and last Sunday for morning prayer, we had each of them doing some of the canticles and so forth. And when it boils down to it, I think it's just seeing these people that you worship with in a normal setting still there, as opposed to, say, pre-recording something with, say, 3 or 4 people. And I think that works just as well. But at least in our scenario, we have taken some comfort in seeing some of the familiar faces still involved with worship going live, you know.
Sure. Yeah, there's something authentic about that moment. Maxine?
Ruben, just to kind of go off of what you were just saying, it's interesting that some of the videos that we've released, some of the videos are just sort of a CD cover with the music going on in the background, because, you know, that's all we kind of have. And some of the videos that we have are 1 or 2 people, sisters, you know, who happen to be in the choir singing together and that kind of thing. And it's interesting to see the response from people who seem to connect better with the visual of seeing people that they recognize from church. That they seem to connect better with images of our stained glass, for example, or things that they're familiar with within the church building, that seems to help to connect them even deeper to, you know, to that sacred space. And because we can't all congregate under the same umbrella of that sacred space right now, that is providing, just images of our space is providing a tremendous amount of comfort and solace.
Yes, that was some of the feedback that we got. I think last week, the rector just dropped in one photo of, we sort of have this quirky-ish mid-century building with this very modern stained glass window behind the altar. And normally we would not think much about it, but just the image, that it was all 5 seconds that it went by, there were several comments that said, we've not been in the church. We literally have not been in the church in 3 weeks. And it was very comforting to see familiar places that we take for granted, frankly. So I think that's the other thing, right? With things that we normally take for granted turn out to be rather important.
Yeah, we're sort of having to learn how to do liturgy in a new way. And I think, you know, all of us as musicians are keenly attuned to what it is in liturgy that works and how it is that we need to plug into that. So for the first time, we have we have opportunities to shape things that we wouldn't really have dreamed of. You know, what video platform should we use? What kind of visual media do we want to see? What kind of camera is going to provide the best resolution? I mean, there are decisions I wish that I wasn't involved in, but I think, you know, for the sake of the final product, I'm glad to be a part of the conversation. And I think the grace that we need to have with ourselves is that I think for most of us, this will feel temporary all the way through, that we will never quite get our feet under us until this is over, and then we'll be glad it is over. So yeah, there's a sense at which, you know, you don't really want to work too hard at this, because it will go away at some point. And then one other thought that I had kind of a while ago is, and maybe this speaks to one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A. How do you let people know that how do you let your parishes and your vestry and your clergy know that you're still working? I think you do your best. I think you seek to create music in whatever way that is, if that's from recorded things that you happen to have, or if that's from things that you record now or broadcast live. I think you just simply have to do your best, and know that there's a educational part of not being able to sing as a choir in real time. There's a part of this that our parishes will begin to see. Oh, I didn't realize how much work went into that, and how much that required being in the same place at the same time. And there'll be I hope, renewed appreciation for choral music when this is all over.
Thank you, David. I think we're going to step into the Q&A period, and actually, David and I can maybe appreciate this more than the other people on the screen right now. But this question has come in from Stephen Plank, professor of music history at Oberlin Conservatory. Dr. Plank writes, online habits of viewing, like the familiar viewing of television, tends to be passive. In liturgical context, we understand that whether you are raising your voice or not, there is an active participatory sense of things. I participate in silence. I participate vocally. The YouTube version of liturgy, however, may snap us back into old habits of passive viewing. Any thoughts on keeping things engaged in an active way? Thank you, Dr. Plank.
Well, let me it may not answer the question entirely, but for example, last morning prayer that we did on Zoom last week, it was, as it was playing, and there were various parts of the very few musical pieces that we dropped into morning prayer because of the limitations, it actually gave me the opportunity in real time to say something about, like, hey, this piece that you're hearing right now, like a little musicological notes on the music, literally in real time, that of course could not really happen. At least I don't currently provide musical notes in our bulletins or anything like that, but this was like literally in real time, and it created some discussion. I think I was playing the BWV 731 Liebster Jesu, and I said something about that, which led me to the hymn, which then led me to some other setting of Bach, all in about 5 minutes. And several of my choir members, including some in the congregation, engaged me on that discussion. And suddenly I think it opened up to them, oh my gosh, he's not just playing a pretty piece on Sunday. There's actually A, thought given to it. B, there's a wider, big balcony view of this that I was not aware of. So there are some incredible opportunities there that are not passive, but really engaging.
Yeah, Tom Smith at Christ Church Georgetown is someone who right away did a good job with sort of notes on the music that would have been sung. And he's been posting recordings of those on their really excellent blog that I think they're calling Grace Under Quarantine. And so that kind of work is something I really aim to start more in earnest for myself. I think if anything, this could be an opportunity for education.
This is, I mean, it's related pastorally. One of the things that our dean did at the cathedral was to begin daily morning prayer and live streaming that. And so now we've been doing that for just about 2 weeks on a daily basis, Saturdays included. And I think that's provided a really good sense of potential interaction where people can write in the comments, please pray for X, Y, and Z. And so that, we're sort of continuing that dialogue throughout the week so that they can further engage with us on Sundays through the live stream. And we can hear them, and see their comments come in. And we really appreciate that. It's also provided this sort of sense of continuity and a sense of stable rhythm and a visual as well.
So you're doing morning prayer there. Is that an online Zoom forum?
No, the dean is, she sort of sets herself up in the sacristy there. And so she's able to just live stream on Facebook. And so that's where most of our congregants, we have an older demographic within our congregation, and those that are on Facebook, that's kind of the only way they can really find us online right now. So
I think the Zoom forum for morning prayer, once you sort of get your people accustomed to how it's all going to go, mainly meaning make sure you mute yourself when you're really supposed to be muted, can be an excellent way, I think, of being in an active context, because the typical view of something that's not participatory can make you want to just kind of sit back in your chair a little bit. Nathan, maybe you want to say more about that. Nathan's been leading morning prayer here, or at least leading the organization behind it.
Yeah, I think in some ways it opens up new understandings of what it means to participate. When I am, saying morning prayer in a congregation, I'm physically present, but are there other presences that can be beyond the physical, that certainly the way we do morning prayer, oftentimes the psalms are sung, or the psalms are said in alternate verses by other people, and so I can rest into the psalm. I can close my eyes. I don't actually need to participate as vocally, but I can meditate on the psalm in a way that perhaps I couldn't if I were singing a refrain, or it just opens up different ways, I think, of understanding how one participates in liturgy, and allows us to sort of think differently about worship. Jonathan Ambrosino, organ consultant, has a sort of a question sort of along those lines that we've addressed a little bit, but maybe we can push beyond. He asks, do you feel your online worship is somehow evocative of normal practice, Sundays or otherwise, or is something altogether new? And I wonder, so as a furthering of that question, what will this experience, or how will this experience perhaps change us as a people in liturgy? Will our worship look different? Will we be doing morning prayer every day, as in ways that perhaps our parishes weren't 6 months ago? Do you all have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say, for one, is something going to be different at the end of this? I think so. I think no question. And one of the things is that, at least in my parish, we are not technologically minded. We've never live streamed anything before 3 weeks ago. And so I think it's pushed us into this new realm of, when this is all over, we really have the potential to reach a lot of people in different ways. Everything from worship to the forums that they do midweek, where you could, very easily call upon a speaker literally anywhere in the world to lead a forum, and not just be limited to those that are in the community, things like that. So our rector is embracing technology, and where sort of the learning curve was a little bit tough the first week. Our first morning prayer was rough. Camera was sideways and that sort of thing. And we just sort of are figuring out as we go. But I think there is a stamp and an impression that will be left behind. Yeah.
I think, certainly there are going to be mistakes made, but that's where grace comes into play, right? I think that without a doubt, our congregations will be re-energized in new ways to reach out to new people who maybe didn't know about our congregation, that kind of thing. I think that whole realm of possibility is really, really exciting. I'll just share an anecdote. Today, we're doing some music of Carlotta Ferrari, a composer I just heard about recently. Discovered that she lives just outside of Milan, and so I Facebooked her this morning, and she responded, and I said, hey, we're doing some of your music and we're live streaming it, and she's like, great, I'm so excited, and I think that sort of thing, where you can can talk to real composers who are alive and well and who really appreciate having their music done. I just think as a musician, this is going to open up a whole wonderful, I hope wonderful, box of possibilities for us to connect.
And when we do come back, just imagine that what the feeling that will be of elation, my goodness, when we finally get back to some sense of normal. I think that's going to be an interesting period of
I think
back
it will be.
together.
I think it will be, but I think it will also be tinged with a very profound grief for many people, and this is something that I haven't really heard reflected on, but I expect this is going to change in the coming days. I mean, we're starting to hear spoken more often that projected figure of deaths as a result of this virus in the hundreds of thousands. So we're approaching a moment of national grief, sort of unlike any that we've had. And we're going to want to, I think church's natural response would want to be to have some sort of liturgical outlet for that grief as it's happening. And again, that's going to be something that's sort of defined by our present circumstances to some degree. So we may be seeing burial offices held in a different way, or we may be seeing a service of remembrance and grief held in a very different way.
Yeah, David, it's interesting you talk about that. I was thinking about segueing to a question asked of a priest in New York who's brought in a question. I happen to know that he's busy trying to figure out how to bury the dead right now, and I sort of thought that his question was going to be along those lines, but in fact, this is what he comes up with. He says, in the time of countless energy vampires, what in this new time gives life back to you? So I think, in other words, what really excites you right now?
Okay, I'll go first. Up until 3 weeks ago, I literally, I would joke that basically I'm sitting in front of the computer dealing with emails all day, but and I still am, but after I have a very active 3-year-old, and after he's asleep, I have thrown myself into practicing, which I have not done in a long time. And that's how I get lost these days. 10 p.m. I'm sitting there practicing and reading as well, reading books that I've been wanting to read for years in some cases, and catching up with that. That has brought me some relief from all this. It's hard to turn off the news. The news is the news, but there comes a point when I just shut it off and get to some reading and some practice. And that has been how and run. I do some running. So that has been how I try to keep sane.
I don't really have a very good answer to this question yet. I'm still trying different things. I feel a lot of guilt around things that I should be doing, quote unquote, should be doing or could be doing. But I'm also figuring out how to homeschool 2 kids for the first time ever. So a lot of times this evening rolls around and I feel like I should try something else, and I just want to fall asleep. So I hope that I kind of settle into more of a normal rhythm. I do really enjoy the whole podcasting routine, and I'd love to be able to get some more farther fetched interviews while everybody's cooped up in their homes. I think that might be a possibility.
We were all talking just before we went live, and I said yesterday was the first day that I really found some sort of sense of peace or rhythm, I guess, in the new way. But that still has kind of ups and downs, really. Every day is like a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. So I'm still, that pendulum is still swinging back and forth for me. And for me, just finding balance right now is just being able to go outside for a walk. We're really blessed here in New Mexico with wide open spaces and lots of great walking trails. And so I'm just trying to get on them on a daily basis.
Well, we're just about come to the end of our hour here. Thank you all, David, Ruben, Maxine, for spending this hour with us and for being so candid, with us and with our colleagues as we navigate these waters that are, surely it seems troubled ahead. And we do this with joy and confidence in our faith and in our profession and in our people, and with the great pastoral voices that you guys bring to your work. So thank you for that. Do any of you want to say anything about your own work, or plug anything of your any of your churches, or speaking for Christchurch Cranbrook, we have a church at home website that we're hoping to have visitors to. They can see what we're up to. I imagine your websites all have similar offerings.
Yeah, at All Souls, come visit us. You can see us learning technology in real time, as I mentioned a little earlier. But I think, like Maxine said, that's where grace comes in, and we're all figuring this out together in our different ways. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and obviously Baca Lake in San Diego. We have a different battle there with trying to reschedule things into next season. Is there a next season? And La Jolla Symphony Corps, same thing. What is happening next season? What can we support? So there are a lot of question marks, but we're all in it together.
Great, thank you.
For us, just, we'd love to invite you to check us out on our weekly, or actually daily, live streaming at our Cathedral of St. John Albuquerque Facebook page. And from there, you can find all sorts of links to all kinds of other things, like our YouTube channel and sacred music page and all that good stuff. And, I just think that as long as we all feel the Spirit moving within us, our congregants and our choirs and the people around us will also feel that Spirit moving. And that's just really, really key to all of this. Just keep the Spirit moving.
Thanks.
St. Peter's, St. Louis can be found on the web at stpetersepiscopal.org. And the podcast I'm involved with, All Things Right and Musical, this is sort of an exciting thing liturgically. I mean, this is so out of left field. None of us knew that 2020 would hold this for liturgy and music. So it's something we'll be unpacking for a long time, and we're starting to now. And actually, we just recently recorded our 51st episode, which we envisioned as kind of a reset of the podcast, and sort of thinking, well, maybe we got too far into the weeds and we should just back up and talk about what Episcopal liturgy is and why it makes it tick. So that's going to come out in a few days, and you can find that podcast on writeandmusical.org. That's RITE is how right is spelled, and musical.org.
Great, thank you. So we'll close in prayer with another collect from the Book of Common Prayer. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give thine angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for thy love's sake. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
have a good evening.
Thanks, Nathan.